Hey, welcome everyone to another Mastermind Adventure stream. I'm here with a bunch of lovely guests. Before I introduce them, I have to introduce my favorite guest of all, which is myself. My name is Arthur. I am one of the GMs here at Mastermind, and today we're going to be talking about queerness in tabletop role-playing games. That means a lot, so we're not going to get into the full breadth of that conversation, but we're hopefully able to start a conversation both at our table and hopefully yours as well. But to start, why don't I have my guests go around and introduce themselves? We're of course going to go with names and pronouns. I'll start with, of course, my name is Arthur, and I use they, them, or he, him pronouns. Mariah, would you like to go next?
Sure. My name is Mariah Treppis, and I use she, her pronouns. Who's next? Up and Amanda goes next.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Hi. Hi, my name is Amanda, and I use she, her pronouns. You go with Sarah, you want to go?
Yeah, I'm Sarah. I use she, her pronouns, and I identify as a lesbian as well. All right, Emery, I think you're the last one.
All right, hi, I'm Emery. I use he, him, or they, them pronouns.
Great. So this is a pretty big topic. Does anyone have any starting things they would like to start us off at?
Well,
I know a big topic we had discussed previously is sort of if a player or a GM wants to bring queer characters both either as a player or as a GM, sort of NPCs, to make them more queer or have better representation, like how would they do that?
Well, I mean, I just kind of put those types of characters into my games, or for example, I'm running a game every other Friday, and one of the NPCs is a non-binary expositor for the Cobalt Soul, and they hired the group to accompany them and one of their assistants to go investigate an island. And even just having a character in there, like, everybody's been responding super well to them, and a lot of the players have tried to get to know them and talk to them and joke around with them and stuff like that. One of the PCs even got the expositor to assist her in setting up said assistant with one of the PCs, because the two of them clearly liked each other. So she got them to help her out. It was super fun. But just basically having a character like that, just be like, yeah, no, they use they, them pronouns.
Having romance in your tabletop role-playing games, now that thing is like a discussion in and of itself.
I did that last time. That was the last one I did. But no, just including characters that are queer and just having that be completely commonplace is what I've done.
Yeah, I like putting romance in my role-playing games. So I run a long-standing Mouse Guard campaign that's currently like on hiatus because of COVID. But for every character, I like have this whole book full of NPCs, and I try to make sure that no matter who the player is, no matter how they identify, there's always different NPCs of different like sexes and genders, and like they're all available unless they're like obviously not available. But I always try to like come up with a couple of different like potential love interests and let the players choose, because you kind of don't want to be like, okay, well, here's your love interest. So I have done that a little bit. I don't know, but I try to make sure that there's different appealing queer characters for them to interact with in general, and then also for them to potentially have their characters with. Who doesn't love love? I mean, it raises the stakes too in terms of storytelling.
Well, actually, that makes brings up a good point for me. I think it's important that we have some characters in our games that aren't there for love. You know, asexual characters, for example, or characters who may just have something else that they want to focus on at that point in their life. And I think that it's super important that we understand that's the case.
Well, and I think we can have asexual characters that are like not necessarily like sex objects, but are definitely like there are different ways of being. There are different, like there's also like different ways of being in relationships as well too. So it's important to represent that as well.
Yeah, it's definitely I think easier as game masters because we can sort of make that choice for our campaign of just saying, well, here are these characters, and they're just going to be in my game. And I definitely think there is that power dynamic that I think we do try to push against of the DM sort of having that control over that. I guess I'm curious, what would you say to players who would like to maybe play a character that maybe it's not the gender that they normally are in their lives, or are queer in some way that either isn't true to them, isn't how they personally feel, but would like to try something new, or is how they actually feel but haven't played therefore and are maybe scared of the reaction from other players or DMs.
Well, I certainly, I both play and DM for different games, but I would say that like when I play, it is very often part of what I'm trying to do is take a look at like what are the parts of different identities that like I actually do identify with, or that I would like to explore more of. Like I'll often say that a lot of my characters are a magnification of one part of me, to kind of like explore what that would be like with that more. So, you know, part of it is just trying to see what that feels like, and you know, trying to do it in this most as respectful and like empathetic way as possible. You know, there's certainly the ability to like run afoul of different tropes and things like that. But like one of my favorite characters that I got to play was when I was actually playing a character who was a man, and like trying to figure out how that fit with me as a player, and also like how I could be that different gender than what I, you know, am in my life usually, and like try and figure out how that felt. So like I totally get that, and it's a really fun way to play, just like I'm also not an elf, but I have played that too. It's a way of exploring things and finding some interesting stuff in there.
That's very true. I
Another
think.
thing. Sorry.
No, go ahead.
I was just going to say another way, if you have a player who, if you're a player who wants to try to play either, you know, somebody completely different in regards to sexuality, gender identity, etc., or from you, or maybe to explore a bit of that yourself, one way you could do it is to find a buddy within the game and say, hey, here's a character concept I was thinking of. Do you think you and I could, you know, buddy up and do stuff? That actually happened for a one shot I played in. Me and a friend of mine played ridiculous twins. One was an Azamar, one was a tiefling, and we both made bisexual disasters. And after the game, he messaged me like an hour later, be like, I have never felt brave enough to play a character that matches my sexuality, and this is the first time I've ever felt comfortable to do that. So like having just a person there, like a buddy, somebody to like be there with you while you're going through that, I think could also be a nice, comfortable, safe way for a player to explore something like that.
I think talking to your game master too about like, because the worst thing that would happen would be for somebody who's like opening up and feeling vulnerable, and it's like, okay, I want to play a character that is this important part of me, and then to have the GM be like, no, I don't think that works, or the GM to be like weird about it or make it into like a joke or a trope or something. So I think if you are a player, and you, especially if you're feeling vulnerable about playing a character, of any kind. I think having an honest conversation with your GM and being like, hey, like, I want to play a character that is say I want to play a character that's a man, but I don't identify as a man. But how can we do this? Or I want to play a queer character, but I'm not queer, or I am queer. How can I do this in a way that how can we work this into the story? And also, I think being clear with your expectations with your GM can only really help too.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, definitely. And as much as it might be really uncomfortable for you, if your GM reacts negatively to that, that's like right away, you know they are not a good GM to play with. Like that, not just knowing that they're probably like queer phobic, but also like they don't respect their players' wishes. They can't conform to what you want. Like that is just a sign of many problems that a GM would have if their immediate reaction to that is like, oh, that makes me uncomfortable or something. Like
Yeah.
even just like to start a discussion through that is what a GM should do.
Yeah. I mean, we talked about this a little bit in our pre-talk, but just this idea that like as the GM and of course also as players, but what you're doing is modeling a lot of what's acceptable around in this game, right? And if you want to be accepting of people of all gender and sexual expressions, then that's got to be not just something that you talk about, but something that you also do, right? And I know that my life is full of people in a variety of gender and sexual expressions, and so it would be dishonest for me to create characters that are not also a reflection of that. So yeah, my NPCs also have a variety of gender and sexual expressions, and I would expect nothing less of my PCs when they come to the table. Right?
Yeah. And a question I when I pitched this ideas roundtable, the question I most got was from like straight DMs being like, oh, I would like to have like, am I allowed to play a bisexual character? Like as a GM, like am I allowed to do that as a player or as a GM? And I think that's um when I hear that question, I think it's sort of an obvious yes. But I think it is a question that a lot of people have, and it's a fair thing to bring up now. So maybe in more detail, what would you all say to someone who is like asking you that question?
Absolutely.
I think it's important to recognize that the tabletop role playing space is different than any other form of media or form of expression, that you're not taking a role away from someone else. A lot of times we talk about saving roles for people who fit those categories, but in a tabletop role playing space, you're not taking a role from someone else, because a person who is, say, disabled in some way can play a character that's not disabled, or a player who's queer can play a queer player that's not queer, and you can have as many queer people playing in a game as you want. There's not a limit to those number of roles.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. Is that the topic of sort of queer washing? Is there a better term for that? Like I know whitewashing. Is there another term for when you like queer people do it? Like queer washing. Yeah, the worry that we are queer washing is just does not exist anymore. There is still the worry that you will sort of not play them true to their character. But I think uh, a great story I have for if you're worried about like not playing them true to their character is I had a friend tell me about a new GM who was running a module, and in this module there was a person who was a trans man, and the this person was sort of nervous about playing that, so decided to just make them a cis man because they didn't want to. They feel like it was a lot for them, and they didn't want to do it justice or things or like know how to navigate that. Um, and I would say that what you like you could my answer to that is you could literally play it the same way, and even your players don't really have to know. Like it's that's not something that people usually just bring up in casual conversation. Like if someone tried to talk about that, I'd be like, "Cool, great, I'm happy for you, but I've got to go fight a dragon. Can we like discuss this later?" Um, And it's definitely one of those things where like you could just like as a GM, if you have a player who like you could just have that in the back of your head and know that and let that inform maybe their decisions, but it doesn't have to be like a central part of their narrative because it's not like queer characters are not 100% queer all the time. That's all they do. Like they're people and they have other things.
Mhm.
So like you could have like two men who are married in a half-orc village, but they're much more worried about the cave troll trying to slam them down than if they can or cannot be married or not.
Right.
Yeah, I
I
think
think the
that's the
flip
most.
side. Oh, go ahead.
I think that's the most important part is just trying to make queer characters that are fleshed out normal people rather
Yeah.
than just like a stereotype. And I think that that's like where I think that's where people can go wrong is by making characters that are just like based on some media stereotype. So for example, if you're a straight GM and you make a gay character and they just like give people makeovers, like that might be less fun for players than if you make like you said a couple of gay fathers who are worried about their son who is a cave troll. I mean, like I like worried about their cave troll son. Like I think that that's much more interesting too than like some kind of like campy stereotype than and I think that that also like it's about imagination too. Like
Right. I was going to say that like one of the other pieces to that is that like if part of the reason why you want to play this gay character is because you want to really feel what it's like to have homophobia around you and things like that, you have to like back up and second, be like, whoa, this is a made up world. Is that even part of what we're mixing in here? Right? Because a lot of times I go to these games in order to play in a world in which homophobia and sexism don't exist, because that's why I'm at this table, because I'd like to escape the world. Right? So if the trauma of our current life being queers right now is what you're trying to translate with that character, be sure that everyone at the table's cool with that too, I guess. Right?
That is a good point. I would say you do not have to get anyone's permission to play a queer character, but to have a queer character who their story revolves around marginalization and homophobia is definitely something that you have to get everyone at the table's permission before, even the GMs,
Mhm.
because I, as a GM,
Exactly.
am not comfortable portraying that with everyone. There are some people who I've told stories uh, that deal with like those kind of topics a lot, but that is not something I'm just cool with. Like the Sunday one shot where let's have deep homophobia run throughout this game. It's like,
no, thank you.
Ye had it, ye nah, real quick.
yeah, and to your point, we have elves and dragons in this world. Why do we also have to have homophobia?
Exactly.
Like,
And honestly, like if you are cis, if you are straight and you want to play a queer character, like if you want to try, I think a big reason why a lot of folks who identify as straight, identify as cisgendered, have a hard time being like, oh, should I do this, is because they don't want to fall into a stereotype.
Mhm.
And because like, I mean, we've talked about this previously, where it's utilizing tropes instead of stereotypes, because a trope is a good way for people to okay, yes, I understand. A stereotype is something that's negative, so it's balancing that. And I think a lot of people in that position are worried that they're going to fall into the stereotype because it might be easier to focus in on than a trope.
yeah, actually, we had a very similar discussion when we talked about race in Dungeons and Dragons, like a month ago, and a very good point that was brought up then that I'll try to echo was basically the idea that like there's this sort of stereotype that dwarves are greedy and love gold and gems. But if you really dig into that and think about, well, like dwarves like these dwarves that exist in this world live in a mountain, and their only really source of like security as a society is to like mine and then trade those items to other societies for like food and goods and services and stuff like that. So they would have a real appreciation for the gems that they mine out themselves, the gold their father taught them to forge growing up, and they would have appreciation for that. So knowing the worth of gold and gems would make it, when you see it, you know how valuable that is. So not necessarily playing a greedy dwarf, but one who understands the worth that gold actually has, is still using that dwarves like gold trope, but is doing it in a way that is more real and fleshed out and a real character. Because like disaster bisexual is, as you pointed out, Mariah, is like a total thing, and is a trope in it is a trope in a lot of the media we watch, but it's also a thing that a lot of people identify with and feel in themselves. So it is not like, if you play a disaster bisexual well, I'm not going to argue with you. Mariah's been doing it for many years.
I certainly have been.
But if you're playing a disaster bisexual in a way that's like kind of punching down at bisexuals, like, oh, my character's such a slut, oh, haha, like this person is just playing into, then that's something that maybe would be worth questioning too, is like, why is my character like such a like like why am I playing this out? Like what is the purpose for myself in order to do that? Like, I think people play games because they want to have fun, and I think playing like, if you're in a committed relationship, playing a promiscuous character can be like super fun, but also like, I think it's just about trying to balance between like playing a genuine character and playing some toxic media thing that we've all
a caricature
culture. Yeah.
So just a reminder to everyone that we welcome discussion and conversations and questions for us in the chat. We just got a great one from Drugged Dwarf, which said that I think before I have a GM deal with queer issues in a mature way, I have to see if they can deal with sexuality in a safe way. And they're asking, what would be the check marks someone would have to tick for you before they can hit the latter, let alone the former. So I think that's an interesting idea of like maybe me as a player, I do want to play a game where like homophobia exists, and I want to sort of explore that, because let's face it, tabletop role-playing games totally can be therapy for us in a multitude of ways. So you like having a game that deals with that is totally cool, but maybe you're not sure if your GM would handle it well, and you want to, how would you parse out if your GM could handle that well before bringing up that actual topic?
I think sitting down and having that conversation would be like the first thing. Like, hey, these are things I'm interested in exploring with my character. Can I go over that with you? Can we figure something out? So not only can you figure out what your GM is comfortable with, what you're comfortable with, because it really is all about communication at the table. This goes for if you're playing something romantic or something tragic or traumatic. It's all about consent, not just with the GM, but also with the players. So this might be something that you would want to have that conversation with the GM, figure out, okay, what's doable? What are we both comfortable with? Blah, blah, blah. Then move on to the other players, because what you want to try to explore might be therapeutic for you, but it could be triggering for somebody else. So I feel like it's important to try and get that situated and get all those consent boxes marked, and even to establish something to be like, okay, can we pause for a sec in case that does bring up something triggering for a player or for the GM.
Definitely, actually, to that point, my first thought was, how do they handle red cards? Like, how does your GM, when a player is like, hey, what just happened is making me uncomfortable, can we rewind? Can we not have it happen? Can we fade to black or something? There are a lot of different ways of sort of using language for that. But basically, when something uncomfortable happens and a player just does not want it to happen in the game, how does the GM handle it? Are they calm? Are they making the player feel comfortable? If so, like they probably will do that the same to you. And if they go too far with the homophobia and you want them to stop, they will. Otherwise, if they start like blaming the player or get defensive, like maybe that's a person you aren't comfortable with and shouldn't do that with.
Well, I think also it's about where the context
Matt,
of
I think
homophobia.
safety tools.
Sorry, go ahead.
Okay. I think safety tools are so important to establish as early as possible. A gaming situation, zero session if you can, really. But then to test, as needed, And I've played in games where we had somebody else that we checked in with. So if you weren't comfortable enough to throw the X card or whatever, somebody else would be able to do it for you. And I think that was really helpful for me.
Yeah, Half Sick of Shadows in the chat asked, how do you figure out how a GM can handle red cards before you actually reach the point of being uncomfortable? And that's a tricky topic because I would definitely say a good green flag is if they bring it up right away. If they bring up that conversation, no one else has to. And also, like, listen to how they bring it up. Are they saying it because they think they should, or are they saying it because they feel it's important? But that's just something like I don't have a perfect answer for. Does anyone else know how to vet a GM besides like having that situation happen?
I mean, there's always the sort of mentioning the idea or telling a story about it having happened somewhere else, right? And seeing what kind of reaction that gets. Think, oh yeah, in my game last Saturday, that someone had to use a red card, and like if everyone laughs and says that you're all wimps because you can't handle it, then maybe there's a problem going on here, right?
Yeah.
Or if the reaction is more like, oh goodness, okay, well, how did that go, and like asking about how it was resolved, implies that you believe it should be resolved in a respectful way. So maybe just kind of feeling that out with some casual talk about it, about the idea of them, would be one way to start.
Ooh, I have another question that I have an answer to, but I would love to hear other people's opinions. If I'm a GM who identifies as straight and cis, and everyone at my table does the same, like and I mean, maybe I want to bring that up, but like, what's the point because no one else here identifies with that, or like, isn't it just like adding on things that aren't needed? What would you say to someone like that?
Well, I would say that first of all, you don't know that for sure. And second of all of you are part of a network that are involved in everyone else in society. And so there definitely are queer people, if not at that table, around that table. So your impressions and the way that you treat even imaginary queer people around you matter, because they inform the way you're going to eventually interact with the real queer people that actually exist all around you.
Yeah, I remember, this is not really a gaming related thing, but I remember at my college there was a drag ball, and there were some people in the queer community who were really offended by the idea of a drag ball, of the idea of straight cis people like co-opting drag and maybe like being offensive in some way, or just the idea of it being sort of appropriative. But then there was another argument that I kind of was really impressed by, which is that, like, no, I think you never know whether somebody is really straight or cis. Maybe somebody is an egg, or is not, like, does not feel comfortable or is feeling constrained by their own identity, and like going to a drag ball is one of those situations where it's 100% safe and acceptable to experiment with your identity. And I think you never know the deep personal feelings of the people around the table unless they share them with you. And I think to assume that if you're at a tabletop with a bunch of people who are maybe in heterosexual relationships or something like that, to assume that they're all straight just because you haven't heard them say that they're queer can be really limiting. And I think you never want to just make sure that people are you want to include everyone, I think, and I think including everyone is always going to make the game richer. It's always going to make the game more fun and more engrossing, because people aren't the same. People are different in the real world, and people should be different in fantasy worlds.
So, Sarah, you just used the term egg. Do you mind explaining what that means for everyone out there in the world?
Oh, okay. So an egg is it's a term that means like a person who hasn't quite realized that they're trans yet. So they say that the egg cracks and then you realize and you like hatch, I guess is the idea. Like so an egg is a person who is still sort of in denial about their gender identity.
Or just in the closet.
But I think it's different from being in the closet in that it's specific towards trans people, I think, as far as I am aware.
And the difference between being in the closet and being an egg is that you don't realize it for yourself.
Yeah.
More so than you don't realize it for other people.
I think
If that
tabletop
makes
role.
sense.
No, that makes a lot of sense. I think also what's great is that tabletop role playing games can also be can help you sort of to that point be like stop being an egg, like crack yourself. I went to this LARP in New Jersey called Utopia Rising, where it was like a zombie LARP where people would play, and there was this running joke in the community that like they had a high amount of trans people there, and it was very much like a guy would show up and be like, oh, I'm thinking about playing a woman this time, just like really like go crazy out there, and then everyone's just sort of like, okay, yeah, give her a month, and then a month later she's like, I think I'm trans, and everyone's like, oh, are you? I didn't guess. And it's like it was sort of a running joke in the community, but I think it speaks to the point that these imagined worlds give us the space to play characters that maybe are more true to ourselves than we even realize. And I think holding that space for people who you might not think need that space as much as they actually do is really important. So it is like, no matter what you think someone's identity is, having that space and treating it real can be very helpful to people.
And it can, having that type of a safe place for that type of expression, it's only going to benefit you and your relationship with that person, and also your game. It's just going to benefit your game too. If people are comfortable, they're going to have a lot more fun in that respect.
Totally.
And I think there's also like an element of being a hero. If even okay, so let's have this like hypothetical all straight, all cis game where the GM who is trying to include some queerness, then maybe if everybody's character is straight and cis, if everybody is everybody at the table, that's how they identify, then maybe this is a chance for their characters to be a hero in a way that doesn't involve like stabbing something. Maybe this is a chance for them to stand up for something, to help young and like find love or something like that. Like it doesn't have to be like high stakes. It can be like a low stakes encounter where it's like you're delivering a love letter from one man to another. It can be as simple and as easy as that.
Ooh, yeah, actually, sorry, go ahead, Amanda.
Oh, I was just going to say, just to that point, I actually have oh no, actually I can't say this. I think one of my players might be listening, but there is a plot in one of my games that is coming up that I think I'm interested to see if my characters even catch on, because just to see if they catch on the queerness of the characters.
Oh, Amanda, now you're just teasing us.
There's a Romeo and Juliet line coming up in one of my games, and we'll see if anyone gets it or not. So.
I think a topic we tried to come back to a lot in these discussions is like, how can this enhance our storytelling? And I definitely think queerness can make your stories more interesting, more engaging, more realistic in many different ways. But one thing I think it really helps is also avoiding other negative, like bad stereotypes that you end up falling into. An example I have is I was made a game for a bunch of kids for a summer camp that was literally the movie of Shrek. And it's really great because
Why am I not surprised?
once they figure it out, they all get excited and they don't think, "Oh, you're uncreative." It's like, "Oh, we're playing Shrek. We love it." And you've got like Larry the half orc barbarian and Don Quixote the centaur bard and Antonio Banderas the rogue tabaxi.
Yeah.
If they didn't figure it out right away, that's their own fault. But I ran into a problem where Fiona the character shows up halfway through, so she has to be an NPC, and the agency she has in the story are things like she has the cool fight with Robin Hood. I'm like, I'm not having an NPC save my entire group with a cool fight scene that they don't get to be a part of, so I can't do that. Like a lot of the things that Fiona does in the movie that gives her agency, I would make a bad game for my players, so I had to scrap them. But then she's just a princess who gets tossed around like an object, and we've seen that story far too many times. So what I did was I made her a man. I made Lord Farquaad, or Lord Eisner, if you understand that reference, just like a gay king who is a totally bad person, but he's also gay and wants this prince so he can marry him to become a king. And it's also a great thing of like, gay people don't have to gay people don't have to be perfect in your game. That's another sort of trope of making them the perfect character, is like they can be bad, just don't make them like Ursula from The Little Mermaid. Because gay people come in all shapes and sizes and all different types of evil.
Wait a minute, Ursula's gay? I thought she was an octopus.
Yes, but she likes other octopi, so that makes her gay. I don't know, man. I mean, if anyone doesn't know this out there, Ursula was based off of a drag queen.
Divine.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I know, I'm being facetious.
Well, I'm just saying for those out there, just so you know.
Ursula. Like, there's something about I think there was something about Ursula. Like, I was 2 years old, like, and I was quoting Ursula like all the time. I was like, no talking, no singing, zip. And I was like, I think that as queer people, like, sometimes are there are things that like where we're represented can have been in the past so limited that, like, as I think just a little baby queer, I always like loved Ursula, and so like that like campy villainousness is super fun.
Well, and sorry, finish your thought. I have a thing.
I just don't want Arthur to be dunking on Ursula, okay?
No. I'm not saying Ursula's bad. I'm saying she just is another example of, like, specifically Disney villains that are very queer coded, and the sort of like queer. The queer Disney villain is a trope, and I'm saying you can have a queer person be the bad guy without having them being super flamboyant and and all about like control and stuff and about. I love Ursula. Ursula's great. I think the Disney villains made a lot of kids queer, and it's great.
I was just gonna say, don't say anything about my girl Ursula.
Well, it's funny because like
Gaston.
Queer coding the villain has been a thing since like the Hays Code, like the 30s, 40s, and 50s and 60s. Like, oh, that person's a bad guy. Let's make them very flamboyant in a certain way. So like I find it interesting that we don't want my brain. I have a million thoughts. So that goes along with what you were saying before. You have this character, this Lord Farquaad character, who is a queer man. He's just also a bad guy, and that's totally normal. That's totally fine. I think a lot of people don't want the negative bits because there have been so many villains that are like, oh, well, they're gay, but we're not going to say it. We're just going to wink, wink, nudge, nudge, especially in older films, where a character like Ursula, who's just so owning it, is fabulous, and we absolutely love it. I lost my train of thought. It happens. I apologize.
I kind of thought that it got dropped, and it's irrelevant now. But
story of
Go
my
on.
life.
Well, in fact, it's slightly relevant with a tenuous thread. Villains. I think there's nothing more satisfying as a queer player than beating the crap out of a homophobic villain. Like,
Oh my God.
I think that, you know, in games where we're trying not to have a lot of homophobia, I think it's really that's an easy way as a storyteller to like flavor in, okay, this character is a homophobe, this guy's a bad person, like, you know, then they're somebody that maybe needs to be evil. Like, because, and I don't know, that's my unrelated thought.
Oh yeah, I'm not suggesting you should make all your gay characters villains.
Homophobic.
More just have a balance, because I think that there is that, like, people try to, like, when something is pointed out as a trope, people try to push hard the other way instead of just being like, let's just make a bunch of characters with diverse personalities and motivations this marginalized group. Is a better way of doing it than just being like, okay, we've got like the magical gay man trope where he's perfect at everything. Simpsons did it. Any more questions in the chat?
Let me see. Oh my goodness, there's a lot of stuff. Spill the secrets. Oh, okay.
Oh yeah, Half Secret Shadows very much wants Amanda to tell all about this Romeo and Juliet situation.
I can't give away the secret. They have to figure it out. It's going to be part of the mystery.
I also think the idea of like making your world without homophobia and sexism is a very fun, just like, thing to do when you're world building, because not only is it like fun for me to play in this world and be like, ah yes, this is a great imagination for me, but it also like it allows you to like create your own world instead of like the stereotypes that we have in real world. Like, what are the social norms in this world where there is no homophobia or sexism? Like, how does that change the world for the better? But like, how is it different? Like, I also like to have a lot of polyamorous characters in my games, where like I just had a game where 3 people were getting married together, and like breaking that norm of being like, yeah, 3 people could get married to each other. I was also like, oh, then what is like do they have the like couples dance in this world? And I was like, no, they have the couples sword fight, because this exists in this. Listen, in D&D, everyone seems to know how to sword fight because there are dragons everywhere and cave trolls are your kid. So I was like, yeah, they all know how to sword fight. Let's them do a sword fight at each other before they get married. And one of my players had this perfect. I did not make this up. They made it up, but they said it was the last time that they fight that is not constructive and with love. And I was like, oh, that's really good. It's like, yeah, now we just fight for blood. Later we will fight to constructively and to support each other. And I just love that as like sort of the, like, I've always found the whole like bachelorette and bachelor party of like, oh, the last time you're signal kind of weird because you're already in a relationship for a long time. But like sort of having that last hurrah of the last sort of like non-constructive loving fight you'll have is like kind of fun, but also it was very constructive and loving, and it was a beautiful sort of dance, so it was all great.
That's adorable. I really like that.
Yes,
Really
what you're saying kind of reminds me of just like a possible answer to one of the questions that was asked earlier about like looking for green flags with GMs, and I think a big one for me would be how they handle gender stereotypes, right? A lot, like, you know, I'm going to have a lot of different characters, and, you know, I'm going to want to do whatever the heck I want to do, right? And are you going to tell me that that's not a thing that my gender of character does or not? And if so, why? Why are we replicating them in this world?
Yeah, even to that, like other things, like how does your DM handle race in D&D? Are all of their half orcs just very basic brutes to be like murdered? Like it showed like to the point of intersectionality, like it shows how they represent how they treat one group is probably representative of how they'll treat another.
Right.
I got a great question here in the chat from Kaylee. Thoughts about the bearing your gaze trope?
Yeah.
Don't do it.
Don't do it.
Let your queers
People are
live.
straight and gay people. It must be equal.
So here's my thing: is I've definitely had queer characters who I'm like, oh, I want to kill these characters because we have to have characters' deaths for our characters, for our players to care about and to hype up the tension.
Yeah,
So
to raise the stakes.
Yeah, raise the stakes. My solution was just to make so many queer characters that I'm pretty sure over 50% at least of queer characters. So when two of them died, it wasn't a bury your gaze. It was just two character NPCs
died.
Yeah, because the real problem with bury your gaze is the well, I think I've thought a lot about the bury the gaze trope because as a sort of game writer who wanted to do that, I was like, what are the actual problems? And I've come to the conclusion, in my opinion, that the two problems are one, that you then take away queer stories and queer characters. That in most stories where bury your gaze happens, which for people don't know is the trope of basically killing off your gay characters.
Especially when they're about to have happiness.
Yeah, the first thing is once you kill them off, you have no other queer characters in your story, and it's all straight people again, which is really bad. So that was my solution to that. The other problem is the fact that like queer people in real life usually do end up, unfortunately, meeting tragic ends or having very fraught lives. So seeing that only that depicted in television and movies and games can be very difficult. So it is definitely like, oh, listen, we are more than pain and suffering. Can you show that also in your stories? And so that's another important way to combat that is like, yeah, have them have happy endings.
Yeah, I mean, it's like having sexual violence in a game. It's like, do we need to do that? No. Like, I don't think that there's a lot of situations in which like your character, like in which your characters need to be like around rape. Like, I mean, personally, that's my opinion. I just don't think. I think there's enough stories in the world that involve that, and I add like a little sprinkle of nasty pepper onto any woman's like story. I just don't think it needs to happen in games that I'm involved in. Like, not interested in that as a player or as a GM. Similarly with the bury your gaze trope, like dude, just like kill your hets instead. It's more interesting. Right before, like Romeo and Juliet, they did it great. That was a great kill your hets. I mean, like.
Or what I like is the new trope coming along, which is the impossible immortal bisexuals, which is basically the gay characters who cannot die. In the Netflix movie The Old Guard, they have this where they have this very well portrayed gay couple who literally get murdered all the time, but they are immortal and they just keep coming back. And they're like, I still love this guy. Now I'm going to murder all of you because you insulted him. And it's just beautiful to watch.
That's awesome. Yeah, I said, do the opposite. Show queer characters in their old age, you know? Show the fact that they, in this world, have been super successful, had a wonderful time, you know, maybe had a boatload of babies, whatever they wanted, right? Show me the queer success. Don't dwell on negative stereotypes that you might be able to reproduce. Right? That's not why I'm here, usually.
That's also a great thing. Is like, yeah, like old gay people are not represented a lot in media in general, and it's just it's great to see because it's like you usually see like the flamboyant 20s who just like is having sex with everything, and it's like we're more than just that. But to Emery's point, like yeah, like have more asexual representation in your game. Like We're not just all the horny bard or tiefling. We are all tieflings. That is a fact.
This is a fact. Well, like, even and going back to Emily's point about having more asexual representation, Critical Role spoilers for anybody who watches Critical Role, but a character recently came out as like, oh yeah, no, I'm ace. I don't care about any of that. I'm not interested in any of stuff. It's fun to watch all of this going on, but like, it's not for me. It was nice to see that because this character had been flirted with by so many NPCs, and it just seemed to just go over his head. But it wasn't that it was going over his head; it was that he was like just not interested, and it was nice. It was cool to see. It was nice to have that there because so often we don't get to really see that anywhere.
Totally.
I guess what you're reminding me of is kind of just like the idea of how it's important to portray queerness when we have the time and the ability to do so, because especially for that mythical table of all cishet people talking to each other,
Yes.
I've never sat at, but I guess exists somewhere. But like that you build your idea of people you've never met in little points of examples, right? You like build a constellation of this idea of person. And if you've never met a gay person, if you've never met an ace person, if you've never met a trans person, and like you only have one example, you're folding all of that onto new people, right? So if we can have more examples, good ones, bad ones, middling ones that don't make sense, just more examples, like that will help people understand that everyone is a whole person, not just this one example they've seen once.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I feel like a lot of people like to use the term like realistic to kind of take away things from people. Like, oh, we wouldn't have these people in this game. It isn't realistic. And most of those people seem to think that D&D is just medieval times, which it's not, for just a variety of reasons, but also for the most part because leather is better armor than padded cloth, and that is just not true in this universe. So if it's true in that universe, it's listen, I know it's something I really don't like.
Yeah.
But my point is that actually realism would be having a diverse amount of queer characters.
Exactly. Yes. Take a big ol' sip.
Well, just have fun with it too. Like, make characters that you like. Make characters that you would want to be friends with.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think oftentimes when we hear this is not realistic, it's code for I don't want to see that in the world that I'm playing in. Because there was a huge thing about for example, there was a combat wheelchair that was recently created, and Twitter went nuts about how horrible it is because it's not realistic, and there were none of those back in the day. But that makes it more fun for somebody who may want to play that. And
it's also
for somebody who that makes their experience better.
Also, I would just argue back to this theoretical straw man that we've created, that like that's not true. They were back then. They maybe had different words for it and had to hide more, but we have like a lot of historical proof that people of like anything you say, like gay, trans, ace, anything that we have today that is just more prevalent, like we had back in that day. We just had different words for it, or they were more in hiding because of the prejudice that you're creating.
Did anybody watch Bridgerton, that new show on Netflix?
It's on my list.
It's on my list.
It's steamy, okay? It's really steamy. But it's basically kind of like what would happen if someone took a Jane Austen fanfic and made a show out of it. Like,
yes, I'm so here for this.
Amazing.
I'm so excited.
And it's full of people of color who are like hot, like dukes and queens, and aristocracy, and I was looking at all the piss babies on the internet being like, it's not historically accurate, like, and
Piss. That's not a
like,
curse, right? Twitch, we can say that word, right?
We can say that, right, guys?
I hope Twitch doesn't is like that. Is that? I don't know. Anyway, sorry. Continue.
Okay, I was sitting here trying to figure out what that was a miscaptioning of. So I'm glad to hear that it was actually something that was said, because I was sitting here going,
Oh,
I
yeah.
don't know what that
I
was,
think-
but it's hilarious.
yeah, that's one of my favorites. Like, but that's the thing. It's like, it's back in original Regency England, women wouldn't be going out wearing short sleeves and gloves, and their gloves would be made out of leather, not velour. But does anyone care about whether or not this woman is wearing short sleeves? No, it's like it's a trashy romance show about like love. Like,
I'm so pleased.
I do
it's
love.
so good. It's so bad, but it's so good. It's like it's good. It's fun. It's
one of my friends and I. That is a friend date that we're having sometime this weekend. We're just gonna binge it, so I'm excited.
But like one of my friends, I see, like, she's from Zimbabwe, and she's like so excited about this show because it's representation for her and for hers. Like, to see these stories of like a black duke who's just handsome and steamy and having a romance. It's important, it's exciting, and all of the people who are mad about there being people of color being aristocrats in this fanfic story need to get mad about the fact that there's machine embroidery all over the costumes, because actually the embroidery would have been done by hand, and that's the inaccuracy that should be bothering you.
And honestly, that's the inaccuracy that does bother me.
Historically did. If you look at any medieval art, there are people of color in them. Like, it's just tiresome when people try to disguise their like racism and homophobia as like
it's historically accurate,
genuine care about historiosity, because actual historians will be like, let me tell you about the Chevalier Dion, you know. Like,
I do love the fact that we've aged up enough that the people who wrote fan fictions as like teenagers are now adults and making TV shows, and there are a lot of shows.
Sure, it's a romance novel, but it's definitely.
No, I know. I don't think it is actually that, but like there are a lot of shows out today that feel like just radical fan fictions of other stories, and I think that's a really great way to take stories nowadays. Is like, if you've got to use a property, or just like take your wild idea with this property and run with it. I really like that.
Yeah.
We also got another comment from Jazzman, who would say, would you encourage someone to play a character with a different preference than their own, or is that in like poor taste?
No, I mean,
yeah,
they can, if that's what they want to play, then they can play
I think that. Yeah, we asked the question kind of earlier, like, how does this make your character more interesting, right? Like, what are the ideas that you're exploring with it? And we kind of mentioned also the idea that maybe you should interrogate why you're interested.
She's playing more wire than I signaled her to get out.
So, I think that would be a fun thing to play.
Yeah, I think play a character that makes you excited to play a character. You know, I play a Randy Bard in my D&D group, and I enjoy every single second of it. My character is like a male halfling. He's 3.5 feet tall, and he will proposition every single NPC that we come across: dryad, lizard, bird, anything. But the moment they say no, he backs off. That's his shtick. I mean, and isn't that all of our shticks? Is that a shtick? I was watching Inuyasha lately, actually, and I was like obsessed with the show when
Go
I was
on.
a teenager. Did anybody watch
The monk.
Inuyasha?
Yeah, the monk was my favorite character in that show.
And now I'm watching it now. I watched it and and he's like, he hits on an 11-year-old. Like, he's got an 11-year-old in his back pocket, and I'm just like, whoa! I can't believe I ever even.
Ooh, this brings it to an interesting topic, which is, if I want to find good representation in media to sort of copy off of, like give me some research for all the GMs out there. What is a show or movie that they should watch to understand what good representation looks like?
She-Ra.
She-Ra. First thought.
Yeah, that's just a golden apple for all of everything, pretty much. Like, most of Queerness is pretty much well represented in that, as far as
I was going to say Steven Universe is my next one. Right after that.
Yep, Steven Universe
I would also
my
repeat
next
the
one.
Old Guard is a great for just gay characters.
The Expanse is amazing. It envisions a world in which there's no sexism, racism, or homophobia, and yet everybody's super prejudiced because if you're from Mars, like, you're the worst. Like,
Listen, those people on Venus. Let me tell you. I'm trying to. What is that old rhyme that's like? Listen, those guys on Jupiter just get more stupider every day. Everybody knows that.
It's what's really interesting about it too is that, like, they have a lot of poly representation, especially in the newest season. Like, one of the most beloved characters is in this like beautiful spaceship polycule, and it's imagining this world where, you know, people have been growing up and living on spaceships and space stations their whole lives, and they're like, oh, people from the inner planets, the moment they reach dock, like, they're off the ship because they think the ship is like not home. And I don't know, I think that, like, there's something really beautiful about the way The Expanse tells stories in which, like, the prejudices that are eating up our country as we speak are not even considered anymore. And yet there's a whole new, it's like, it's not about like your it's not about your gender, it's about how much gravity you had growing up. Like, so good. Watch that for sure.
Just an equally ridiculous way to categorize people, but sure. As long as it's not the one we actually deal with, I'll be happy. Any, like, I realize that, like, Steven Universe and She-Ra are both really great representations, but they're also, like, very, like, kids shows. Which I do love because it's good to, like, represent for the next generation. But does anyone know any, like, anything that gets even close to that that's, like, made for a more mature audience?
Looks like we have some suggestions in the chat. Like Star Trek Discovery. And what is this? Polyjuice said Killjoys is a sexy space action adventure with a lot of queerness and a kinky religion. So
Killjoys.
Yeah.
I'll bring that to my list.
Check that out. Whoops.
Yeah, I just realized I can't open that in that chat.
Open a new tab there.
I'm thinking about, like, in books, like, there's this one of the books that, like, most captured my heart is this book called The Pillars of the Earth, and there's a lot of, like, it's a historical fiction book. It's that book and the sequel, and in that book there is a lot of it's set in the 1100s and the 1300s, and in the first one there's a ace character. He's just a monk. He's never been with women. He thinks that, like, the idea of he's a monk, so he's, like, so religious that he thinks the idea of, like, being with a woman is super gross, and he is just, like, it's a really interesting portrayal. I mean, the world there is very, like, nasty, brutish, and short, but it's about the building of a cathedral. And then the second book is about, like, what's going on in this town 200 years later, and there's some queer nuns in there.
Queer nuns.
There's a little barrier. There's some gay monks, some queer nuns. I mean, that's where the queers were. If you're asking for the historical times, like that's where a lot of the queers were, was in the monasteries.
There is a book series that I really like called The Parasol Protectorate that has a lot of, I love so many of the characters, and a lot of the characters are queer. So this is a universe, it's a steampunk universe, and the main character, Alexia Terabati, is soulless. So she has no connection to the aether, which is what causes all these immortal things. So there's vampires, there's ghosts, there's werewolves, and all of them have a certain connection with this ether. And only people with enough soul connection to that ether can be transformed into one of these undead things. However, it's in England, so of course the vampires are out there helping, advisors to the crown, to Queen Victoria. And of course the werewolves, because they're also immortal, are fighting in her armies to make sure that the empire is completely maintained. The ghosts are the ones that are the real bummers, because basically the more your body decays, the more your soul decays, and you just go insane. But there are so many great queer characters in this series.
Oh yeah, I'm with you now. Okay.
There's so many good queer characters in this series, including the beta of the London Wolf Pack, and he's, oh god, I loved him. And also one of the vampires that's best friends with Alexia. He has this pod of dandies that are all looking to become vampires, but he's also a dandy himself, and it's such a fun series, and I really appreciated the way that Gail Carriger, who wrote it, didn't just make them gay for the sake of being gay. That was just one aspect of them, because the a couple of the werewolves in that pack were, they ended up falling in love eventually, and it was beautiful and it was lovely, and it was, I don't know, it was super interesting, and I really enjoyed it. And I don't know, I there might be some good coming out of that series in regards to representation.
You just used the word dandy. Would you like to explain that for everyone? Although I don't know it fully, so is it something you could explain that Twitch would not get mad at you for?
Okay, so a dandy during Victorian England was a young gentleman who took a lot of pride in his appearance. So he would often wear the latest fashions. He took great pride in looking nice, being polite, being a part of high society, stuff like that.
Fun fact, you know the song Yankee Doodle?
Yes.
I'm a Yankee Doodle dandy. That song is making fun of Americans for being country bumpkins, and it's really funny that we co-opted it as an American song. A Yankee Doodle dandy is like, I'm an American country bumpkin. The whole called it macaroni.
That
Macaroni was a
club.
very fancy club for the queer youth of British dandy society, and so they were wearing incredible French silks and perfect
immaculate
cravats and stuff like that. And so the idea that a Yankee Doodle dandy would stick a feather in their hat and call it macaroni is it's a read, sis. It
is. It really is.
So I think we've had a really great discussion here, and if there are no more questions in the chat for us, I think we will start to wrap this up. But does anyone have any closing thoughts that they'd like to give out before we end it? And of course, if you got any more questions to fire up in the chat, please do them now. Anyone like to go first?
Well, I guess I would say that my thoughts around queerness on role-playing games are that if you're the GM or the player, tell the stories that you want to explore, right? So if you're trying to pull in an identity or expression that you've never gotten to do in your daily life, think about why, and if you're doing it as honestly as you can, you'll learn something from that, and you are certainly going to be helping the people around you. Also, if you can create a variety of characters and interactions that can like expand the way they think about queer people, and maybe even themselves and or yourself. So.
Yeah, totally. My closing statement would be that in the player's handbook of D&D 5th edition, there is a whole passage about how elves are like their god, in the sense that like the elven god has no gender, so elves can be that way too. Basically, a very nice sentiment to non-binary characters that they are welcome in this universe, and I like that. In the same very book, the book talks about the player and says he/she. And it's one of the things that like you have to realize non-binary people are not interesting things that we can just play. They're players too. They exist out in the world. And also he/she is so annoying to read. But the basic fact is that like it's not just about characters that you can play, it's about the people at your table and the people at your table who they will meet. And that's just something we want to expand everyone's horizon, both in how you tell stories, but also how you treat the people around you.
I guess my closing statement would be if including queerness within your game, whether as a player or a dungeon master, if you're curious about how to do so, you can do some research. You can reach out to your queer friends to ask for advice on how to do so. Talk to a buddy to have like a safe means of doing so. And it doesn't have to be a gigantic leap. It can be teeny tiny little baby steps to get you there until you're that comfortable. It doesn't have to be an all-in situation. You can get to that point. It doesn't have to be all in. You can take your time.
Anyone else? You don't have to make a final dissertation at the end of this if you don't want to. If you just want to end on that lovely note, we can do that as well. But I want to give space for Sarah and Emery if you want to say something as well.
My final statement is that like queer happy endings are possible. I am married to a wonderful woman. I have a baby. Like it doesn't have to be tragedy. Like our lives are really fun and really worth living, and I feel like it shouldn't be barrier gaze. That's why I think it should be in the stories you tell. You should try to make your queer characters full, interesting, dynamic people that have flaws and have triumphs and struggles, just like the queer people that exist in this world.
Hear, hear. Amir, would you like to say anything, or shall we head off?
I'm good. I think that was a good note to leave it on.
Great. Can we leave it on the fact that my mug, who I got from one of my players, says, "Welcome to D&D, where everyone is gay and keeps seducing the NPCs." Y'all have a great rest of your night.
Good night.
Good night, everybody.